It's week 4 of the UFL season, and your Stallions now are the only undefeated team remaining in the league. We're going to talk about last week's win, big win over the Memphis Showboats. We're going to preview this upcoming week's game against an XFL conference team, the DC Defenders, and talk about everything else that's going on with the Stallions and across the UFL in this latest episode of State of the Stallions. Thanks for tuning in.
Here we go. Hey, giddy up on 3. 1, 2, 3. Giddy up.
You can feel the buzz when you're around this city. People have fallen in love with the Birmingham Stallions. Here we go. We're getting a little juice going.
USFL Championship.
All right, so let's recap a little bit what happened last week. The Stallions played the Memphis Showboats in somewhat of a rivalry game at home, the home opener at Protective Stadium. And overall, I think we finally really saw the Stallions team we've been waiting to see. The Stallions won their first 2 games, but not necessarily in a dominant or decisive fashion. And unfortunately for Memphis, they were the victims of that first really dominant, decisive win from the Stallions. Final score 33-14. Memphis, similar to last year, snuck in a safety at the end there to get 2 more points. But otherwise, it was quite a dominant game from the Stallions. The offense really finally kind of hit their stride with Adrian Martinez at quarterback, who we'll talk more about. He had a huge game, and the passing game really sort of was clicking in a way that it hasn't previously. Still, the Stallions were able to continue running the ball and most importantly, sort of finishing drives and finding the end zone, putting up 33 points, which was, I think, up until that point, the first game so far to have over 30 points and have a quarterback throw for over 300 yards. And so really great offensive outing. And then on the defensive side, again, which we'll talk about more, but really great defensive performance. The defensive line was incredibly dominant. Case Cookus had to leave the game. I'm not sure if that was based on injury or if that was based on just protecting him because he looked like he was maybe going to die if he stayed out there. But the Showboats offense, other than a few series here and there, really couldn't do much of anything. So it was a close game in the first half. The Stallions, it was closer than maybe it felt like it needed to be. Going into halftime, it was a 1-score game, and it felt like the Stallions were on the cusp of maybe running away with it. But if a couple things went wrong, then the Showboats were could hang around and maybe cause some trouble. But the second half, the Stallions came out and just sort of, all gas, no brakes, just sort of hit Memphis in the teeth, and it was over. So it was a really great game. Hopefully you were able to be there. Great environment at Protective Stadium. One of the really exciting nights there with the season opening. Funny Maine was the host, and he said he felt like after all the places he's been across the country, it was top 10 atmosphere in terms of sporting events. And so that just goes to show, if you haven't been out to a game, or if you weren't able to make this first one because you were at A-Day or something else you had going on, then definitely make a priority to get to Protective this upcoming Saturday night, because it's not something you want to miss, and you definitely want to come out and support the team. So that being said, let's break it down a little bit further, and let's talk about my 3 big sort of takeaways from this game. My first takeaway from the game is that Adrian Martinez can play. And if you've listened to my show, you know that since day one, I've been very high on Matt Corral, and I haven't talked as much about Adrian. And a lot of that was based on their time in college and watching them in college. I certainly thought Adrian was a very good quarterback and was excited to see what he can do. But having seen what Matt Corral did in college, I really thought that he would sort of be the guy for us this year. And honestly, I'm still high on Matt Corral. I think these are both incredible quarterbacks. I think they're 2 of the best quarterbacks in this league. If they were on different teams, I think they'd both be starters in this league. It just so happens that they both play for us. And, that's nice for us. And sadly, we can't have them both out there at the same time. Only one of them can play. And right now, it looks like it's going to be Adrian for the foreseeable future. But I've got to acknowledge that even though I was very high on Corral, I mean, Skip chose in the middle of the week to go with Adrian and make Adrian QB1 for this game. They asked Skip after the game, did you kind of decide the way Adrian was playing to just let him keep going, play the hot hand, or was it a predetermined that he would be the the only quarterback to play in the game. And Skip said that during the week he decided Adrian earned the QB1 job and was going to be the only quarterback who played against Memphis. And so, anything can change, but right now it looks like this is Adrian's team. And based on what he did in the game, you can see why. He went 18 of 28. Not a great completion percentage, but good enough to get the job done. He had 334 passing yards, first quarterback in the UFL this season to throw for over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, a 129.2 passer rating, which is really good. Of course, we know what he can do with his legs. He really didn't do as much with his legs this week. I mean, he had 5 carries for 44 yards, which is still good. It was the most rushing yards any player on the Stallions had, and he had a touchdown. So total, he had 378 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is, pretty impressive, just shy of 400 yards there. But most of it was with his arm. And I think that was the question with Martinez was we know what he can do with his legs, but can he be consistent with his arm? Can he move the ball down the field through the air? Because some of what we saw in the first 2 games, the second game, he certainly had some flashes. The first game was a little bit more rough, but again, it was a very small sample size. But I was very impressed with what I saw out of him, especially with his throws down the field. He was in sync with his receivers. It was great to get to see him hooking up with Deion Kane down the field, got Jay Sternberger more involved in the offense. He had an incredible throw to Ricky Person, who made an incredible catch down the sideline. It was just his ball placement down the field was, again, a long touchdown to Marlon Williams. I mean, we could go on and on about all the plays he made, but it was just really impressive. And like I said, I hadn't been as high on him heading into this week, and James Larson and I debated on the show last week, and so James was right. Adrian started the game. I was wrong about that, and again, like I said, it's not at all to knock Adrian. I never thought he was not a really solid, good quarterback, but I've got I was on record saying that I thought Corral was the guy, and again, unless something changes, it looks like I was wrong about that. I think Adrian is the guy for the foreseeable future based on how he performed this past week, and so that's certainly an exciting thing for us. And again, it's nice to know that if he gets hurt, if something happens, like we've got some guys who can play behind him too. My second takeaway was that, and this is no secret if you watch the game, this D line is the best unit in the league. I mean, I went ahead and tallied it up thanks to Pro Football Focus. In the past 3 games, just the defensive line, this doesn't include the linebackers or the secondary or anything like that, but just the defensive line has had 34 quarterback hurries, 4 quarterback hits, 16 sacks, and for a total of 54 total pressures. I think I made a mistake there. I think I said thus far this season. That's actually just in the last 2 games. Just in the last 2 games, they've had 54 total pressures on the quarterback. They got 27 pressures on the quarterback on average the last 2 games. And again, about 8 sacks on average per game, which is just crazy numbers. I mean, honestly, I felt bad for Case Cookus watching the game this past week because the dude was just getting obliterated every time he dropped back to pass. I mean, Jonathan Garvin put a hit on him, heard round to the world. DeMarcus Mitchell was just terrorizing the Showboats O-line. Don J. Trillman was doing what he does. Carlos Davis, Jordan Thompson. I mean, all those guys were just, I mean, it honestly looked like you were watching like a college defensive line versus a high school offensive line or something like that. I mean, it really didn't look fair. And this D line, they've got, I think through 3 games, they lead the league right now with 17 sacks. The next closest team has 9. The Stallions last year all season put up 19 sacks, if I remember correctly. So 3 games into the season, we're just 2 sacks shy of them eclipsing how many sacks we had last year. So, and we didn't have a bad D line last year. I mean, we had some really good D line players. But that just goes to show you how dominant this unit has been. And like I said, I think it's fair to say they're not just the best unit on the Stallions. They're the best, I think, unit in the entire UFL right now. And I think any team that's going up against them is, doing any sort of game planning, anything they can do to try and slow this D line down. But I don't know if you can. I'm really interested to see how this week goes against the defenders. The defenders have given up a decent number of sacks this season already. So, and they've had some changes on their O line, over the first couple of weeks. And so I don't necessarily think they're one of the best O line groups in the league. They're still kind of solidifying things, and they could be in for a long day against the Stallions front 7 especially. And then a final takeaway, again, not a secret if you watch the game, but Birmingham is the team to beat. Their record shows that they're the only undefeated team left. Their play shows that. I mean, they look dominant. The stats show that. I posted earlier this week. If you go through all the sort of offensive and defensive stats, kind of the main stats like points scored, points given up, total yards for, total yards against, rush and pass yards for, rush and pass yards against, et cetera, et cetera. The Stallions are number 1 or 2 in basically every single major category. There's really it's very hard to find any weaknesses to this team right now, especially again with the way that Adrian Martinez played this past week. I think that was the one big question was what are they going to do with the quarterback thing? Are they going to play two quarterbacks? Is one quarterback going to kind of emerge? Like, they could run the ball, but we hadn't necessarily been amazing throwing the ball the first 2 games. But the way Adrian threw the ball this past week, that sort of put that to rest. And so now, I mean, this team has no real weaknesses that I think anybody can kind of point to, at least no glaring ones. And they're certainly not unbeatable. I think every team in this league could beat any other team. I think there is a lot of parity. And even the teams that are 0-3, I mean, they've been in games. So I'm not saying that the Stallions are going to go undefeated or anything like that, but I think they're certainly capable of doing that. And it's pretty clear that they're the team to beat in the UFL right now. So those were my big takeaways from the game, and I want to quickly also recognize my 3 stars of the game. It was a hard week to pick because the Stallions played so well, and there's so many guys that really deserve to be recognized. So it was tough, but I narrowed it down to these 3. First, I want to give 1 star to Dion Kane. Dion was targeted 8 times by Martinez and had 7 catches, and out of those 7, he had 144 yards. Didn't find the end zone, but still. He leads the league right now in yardage, receiving yardage, and doesn't lead the league in catches. He's averaging, I think it's like somewhere between 15 to 20 yards per catch. So he's been a huge threat for us down the field. Had some really great catches, a really great one right before half. Again, this is kind of one of the things the Stallions have become known for, but finding ways to score before half. We got the ball with very little time left. Adrian hit Dion down the sideline on a play that really shouldn't have been allowed by the defense, the Showboats defense, but Dion made a great play and a great catch, and that got us down in field goal range before time expired for half. And so just things like that. Dion, I was kind of waiting for a wide receiver 1 to emerge for us. There's a couple guys I think that were candidates for that. And Dion definitely was probably in the front running of that for the first couple of weeks, but hadn't really separated himself from the group. But I think this week really solidified him as sort of the number 1 wide receiver for us and kind of our top target. And again, especially the way him and Adrian Martinez were sort of in sync. I think it's going to be a good year for those 2. And then for my 2-star player, I went with Carlos Davis. And again, this was tough because honestly, I could have given stars to every single D lineman. I mean, last week I gave us 1 star to the entire starting defensive line. I wanted to kind of maybe do something similar again, but I don't know. I might have that temptation every single week of the season, so I didn't want to get into that habit. But I chose Carlos amongst the guys I could have chosen because I definitely could have also chosen Jonathan Garvin, Dondre Tillman, DeMarcus Mitchell. Again, I could keep going. But, I wanted to recognize Carlos, 1, because he had an incredible game. He had 4 tackles, 2 sacks, a tackle for loss. But also just the body of work that he's put together this season. He has 6.5 sacks so far on this season, which leads the entire UFL, which is really impressive as an interior defensive lineman. And he's just been dominant every single game and every single time he's been on the field. He's been so good for us. I just felt like based on his performance again, both this past week and this season, I really needed to recognize him and talk about the way that he's playing and what he's meant to this team so far and give him 2 stars. And then, no real surprise. I've got to give 3 stars to Adrian Martinez. Again, almost 400 yards of offense, 3 touchdowns. He did have 1 turnover. That was, I think, the one area of his game that he could improve, 1 fumble, but no interceptions, took care of the ball otherwise. Really was in command of the offense, in sync with his receivers, distributing the ball really well to different guys like Dion, like Jay Sternberger, like Ricky Person, like Marlon Williams. And, again, just hard to say enough good things about his performance. And he was voted the player of the game by fans on our X poll. And, I certainly agree. I mean, I think it's hard to not make a case that he was the most impressive player out there this past weekend. So that's enough for this past week, and let's look ahead a little bit to the Stallions' upcoming game against the DC Defenders this Saturday night at 6 p.m. at Protective Stadium. Make sure if you haven't yet bought your tickets to go do that. They're only $10. We need everybody there. There's been a lot of talk about attendance, which we'll get to later in the show, but would love to see it packed out, this Saturday night. Want to give my three sort of keys to the game heading into this matchup with the Defenders, who are 2-1 on the season out of the XFL conference. The first thing I would say is I think we need to get CJ going in this game. CJ got off to a really hot start the first two games of the season, was leading the league in rushing, and it was clear that the Showboats really made it a priority to try and contain him and shut him down in this game, and they pretty much were successful at doing that. The Showboats have a really good defensive line and sort of front seven, and they were pretty much able to contain CJ throughout the game. He had 10 carries, but he only had 19 yards, so he averaged less than 2 yards per carry, didn't have a touchdown or anything like that. We were able to run the ball still a little bit with Adrian kind of scrambling and getting out of the pocket. Also, were able to run the ball with Ricky Person, who had some nice runs. But, what makes me worried is I don't want us to lose our balance. The first two games, we didn't really have great balance because we were running the ball super well, but we were struggling a little bit in the passing. This past week, I felt like it flipped a little bit. We threw the ball really well, but we struggled a little bit more in the run game. And again, I think part of that was the Showboats were probably trying to, they probably looked at the tape and said, hey, these guys can run the ball really well. Let's try and force them to go to the air and not let them run on us. And so credit to their defense. Connor Lake, great defensive coordinator. And the Stallions were fine with that. Martinez carved up the defense with his arm. But I think we need to continue to be a balanced team, continue to be able to both run the ball and sort of dominate the game on the ground, as well as pass the ball with Adrian, whoever's in there. And so I think this is one thing that we need to try and do this week is get CJ going. The Defenders don't have a great pass defense. It's actually one of the worst in the league. They've given up a lot of yards, so I don't have doubts that we can move the ball on them in their secondary. But they have a decent run defense. It's not amazing. I mean, they're giving up 83 yards per game on the ground, which isn't bad per se. It's top half of the league. It's not as good as the Stallions, who are only giving up 42 yards on the ground per game. Just saying, but it's still good. And so I think we're going to have to work a little bit to establish the run. They've got a good line, defensive line, and some good linebackers and that sort of thing. So I think we need to work to establish the run, get CJ going, kind of get some offensive rhythm and balance, and I think that'll help us to perform as well as we're capable of. The other thing I would say on the defensive side of the ball is we got to get off the field on third down. I think if you want to talk about weaknesses to this team and particularly weaknesses to this defense, again, it's pretty hard. You got to really kind of get into the weeds of things to talk about what could be improved. But I do think this is one thing that could definitely be improved. Getting off the field on third down. We had one really frustrating moment this past week where we had I can't remember the exact yardage, but it was a third and maybe 7, 8, something like that. And the DC didn't convert the third down, to our defense's credit, but there was a holding penalty, and Skip, for whatever reason, decided to accept the penalty and back them up and make them replay the down, in being like a third and 18 or 19 again or something like that, which you'd think is pretty highly unlikely for them to convert. And I think playing the field position game in that thing, Skip trusted the defense. Well, they'll stop them here and we'll get the ball back, a little better field position. But we didn't. We gave up a super long third down conversion. And, that's not the first time I've seen that happen this season in terms of third down conversions. I know against Arlington, we really struggled to get them off the field on third down. And so that's something I think this defense really needs to work on. We've been really good in terms of keeping people out of the end zone. We've only given up 3 touchdowns, and 2 of those were just kind of really deep passes where a receiver got behind the secondary and they scored on a 50-plus yard touchdown. There's really only been one kind of drive that we've given up a touchdown on, and that was against Memphis this past week. And it was still also kind of a pass play where it wasn't as long of a pass, but Vinny Papali got past Chris Jackson in the slot and was able to get into the end zone. So, I mean, defensively, we've played really well in the red zone. We've played really well in terms of forcing people to either settle for a field goal or not score at all. Again, obviously, we've talked about the pressure our defense has been able to get. I mean, defense, again, it's there's not a lot to say about how they could be playing better. But the one thing I do think they could do a better job of is getting off the field on third down. Right now, we're at 45%. We're allowing teams to convert 45% of the time, which is 5th best in the league, so bottom half of the league. So that's one thing I think this defense really needs to do. And I think especially against this DC team, the offense for DC has kind of struggled this year. When they lost Abram Smith, I think that really was a huge blow to them. Everybody kind of almost universally predicted him to probably be the best running back in this league, and a lot of their offense was going to go through him, and they just haven't been able to find a guy to replace him yet. And they also lost De'Aaron King, who was Jordan Ta'amu's backup last year, but they would bring in as kind of like a gadget quarterback. And so it's really all kind of fallen on Ta'amu, and that hasn't really gone very well. And so the defense, or excuse me, the offense for the defenders has left much to be desired. And I think our defense, um, if things go like they have looked the first couple of weeks, based on that, our defense shouldn't have too much trouble with this defender's offense if they play like they're capable of. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to, get a sack on first down, give up a couple yards on second down, force them into a third and long, and then give up a conversion. That's the kind of thing that especially I think our secondary and our defense needs to work on heading into this game. And then lastly, I think the big thing, and this is something I don't know, you might be hearing me say this every single game from here until the end of the year because it's just a theme with the UFL, but we've got to finish the game. I mean, you look at DC last week against Arlington. Arlington had them on the ropes. They should have won the game, should have been over. And they let DC score. They let DC convert that third and long play. They let DC go down the field and kick a field goal and win the game. And, that's not the first time that's happened in the UFL this season. Probably won't be the last. I was talking with some people about this last week, but really in this league, you can't actually feel safe with a lead unless it's a 20-point or more lead because a team can score, get a 3-point conversion, get a 4th and 12 play, keep the ball, score again, get another 3-point conversion. And in a matter of minutes, a team can put up 18 points. And so if you don't have about a 20-point lead or more, you're really not safe. And right now, teams are 100% converting those 4th and 12 plays. And that coaches are scheming all week. Hey, if we get in that situation, what play are we going to run? And they're repping it and they're repping it and they're repping it. So defenses are a little bit at a disadvantage there. 4th and 12 is not necessarily an easy play, but it's not out of the question. Again, especially if you've kind of been preparing for that moment all week. And so far, teams have been able to convert that 100% of the time. And in each case, it's led to the team that got the conversion winning the game. And so what you don't want to have is a situation where we dominate the game, we're winning, but we don't, maybe we turn the ball over, we have to settle for field goals, whatever the case may be. We kind of had this with Michigan. This is the situation we're in with Michigan, where our defense kind of bailed us out at the end, but it very easily could have gone south very quickly if we had let Michigan score there at the end of the game. And so that's something I think if you look at the tape, if you look at the stats, all by all accounts, I think the Stallions are the better team, and Stallions should win this game. But again, if you don't play smart, if you turn the ball over, et cetera, DC is good enough to knock us off. They're good enough to hang around, and you don't want it to be something where we're only up by 10 points with 5 minutes to go and DC has the ball, because that's basically, again, sort of what happened with Arlington last week, and you saw what ended up happening with that. So that's the big thing. I think this is, again, I'm going to harp on this probably all year, just the way this league is structured, the way the onside rules are and all that kind of thing. You've got to be able to put teams away. You've got to be able to finish games. You've got to be able to score a lot of points and get out to a big lead, because otherwise, it's not over and you're not really safe. So those are my sort of 3 keys to the game for the Stallions this week. Let me go ahead and give a prediction, and then we'll move into the roundup and kind of recap what's been going on with the UFL. But I think for my prediction for this week, I do think the Stallions win. Again, the Stallions to me look like they're just getting better and better. DC is just a team that they're not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, I think right now they're still struggling to find that an identity. And on the one hand, DC could easily be 3-0, or maybe not easily, but they could be 3-0 if they had cleaned some things up against San Antonio in that first game. It ended up being sort of like a 1-score game there at the end. But on the other hand, DC also very easily could, or maybe even should be 1-2, if not 0-3. They kind of barely beat a bad Houston team, and they really probably should have lost this past week against Arlington if Arlington again had been able to put them away. So, DC is kind of one of those teams where it's like they're not bad, but also they're not great. They're kind of figuring things out. They're kind of scraping by the skin of their teeth. And so I think with the momentum the Stallions have, again, being at home again this week, kind of figuring out the quarterback situation, just again, I think overall being the better team. I mean, it's hard for me to really go against the Stallions unless I think the Stallions just kind of shoot themselves in the foot. So I'm going to go with the Stallions winning this one. I think it's going to be probably a similar affair to last week, where it's a little bit closer in the first half, but I think by the end the Stallions kind of run away with it. I think the Stallions put up 30 again, over 30. And I think they're, again, pretty much able to contain the defender's offense. So I think we actually get a pretty similar score to this past week. This past week was 33-14. I'm going to go this week with, we'll say, 31-16. So maybe slightly closer, but I think similar type of score as we saw this past week against Memphis. So with that being said, let's go ahead now and move to the roundup. So a lot to go over this week with the roundup. First thing I just want to address out the gate because it's what everybody wants to talk about is TV ratings and then attendance for the week. So as far as TV ratings this past week, the Stallions game. I'm gonna start with the Stallions game, then kind of talk about the average for the week, and then I'll talk about the average for the season. So for the Stallions game averaged 837,000 viewers. It's a little bit disappointing number because it was a primetime game on Saturday night, Birmingham, Memphis. I was hoping that it would maybe be a little bit closer to a million. It did peak at over a million, which is great to see. Every single game the Stallions have played in so far has peaked at over a million viewers, even if it hasn't necessarily averaged a million. So, I think that's a good sign, but would have liked to see that average be a little bit higher. But, 837 is not bad by any stretch of the imagination. The average for the week was 842,000, which is basically more or less kind of the same as week 2, which I think that's kind of the good news for the league is that the numbers aren't, amazing. They're not sort of like blowing away numbers that we've seen in the past, right? Like if we were getting 2 million or more, or something like that, that would be incredibly impressive. The good news, though, for the league is that the numbers are much more stable than years past. In years past, a lot of times with these leagues, you'd have a huge week one, maybe 1.5 or 2 million viewers. But then by week 3, 4, it would really trail off. And you might be getting only an average of, 4 or 500,000 viewers in the middle of the season. And so to average thus far, close to just over a million the first week, about 850,000 the next 2 weeks is, fairly stable and consistent. And so I think, that's a really positive sign for the league. Um, and then as far as the season average, just to throw that out there real quick, right now we're looking at about 911,000 for the season average for TV ratings. So just shy of that a million mark. I think that a million mark is a good sign. Like if you could kind of get there. So we need to get that average up by about 90,000 viewers on average to get closer to a million. But we're sort of, right there. As far as attendance, there's been a lot of talk about this week. Honestly, I'm kind of sick of talking about attendance, so I'm not even going to probably get into it that much. I just kind of give you the numbers and give you some very brief thoughts, because I think right now, there's a lot about this going on online, and I think it's, I don't know how productive it is. We'll put it that way. But the Stallions at their first home opener had 12,265 fans. I thought that was a good number. I mean, I don't think it's a great number. Do I want it to be more? Yes, absolutely. Could it have been worse? I think it could have. Alabama had their A-Day game with over 70,000 fans just down the road in Tuscaloosa a couple hours before the Stallions game, and I don't think that had a drastic effect on the Stallions game, but I do think it had an effect. I mean, I saw lots of people online saying like, "Man, if this game wasn't so close to A-Day, I would go." So I do think that made a difference. How much of a difference we might never know, but it's just a thing to consider. But I'm not saying that as an excuse for the Stallions or for Birmingham or for the city. I mean, there's the thing is in all of these markets all the time, there's going to be other options, right? Like in Detroit, I know there's been Red Wings games and Pistons games and Tigers games. And you could go through the list of every single city. It's a they're all decent sized cities with lots of things going on, with lots of things to do, and so every market has competition, and so the Stallions are no different in that. Now, again, the Stallions are a little bit maybe different in the sense that, as far as I don't know of any of these other markets that had a football event happening on the same day, again, with over 70,000 fans in attendance. So that's a little bit, it's not like we're going up against just other sports, but we are specifically going up against a football game against, the biggest college team in the state, which, it's kind of like, I don't know, the Panthers and Michigan trying to take on the Lions or something like that. So, I on the one hand, I don't say that as an excuse, but I do think it's worth acknowledging. But that being said, I mean, just over 12,000. My prediction was kind of like I thought at the lower end we'd be at about 12,000, higher end about 15,000. So we came in what I sort of predicted, but a little bit on the lower end. Um, Again, yeah, I would love for that to be more. I'm hoping that improves over the season. Maybe this week we get a little bit of bump because that 8A game is behind us. But Talladega is this weekend. I mean, again, there's always going to be stuff going on. So we'll have to see what happens. Hopefully, we get a bump this week. The next home game after that, AJ McCarron comes back to Alabama, so maybe we'll get a bump from that. I mean, who knows? At the end of the day, the Stallions had the best attendance in the entire UFL in week 3, and some people might say, well, that says more about the other teams than it does the Stallions. whatever, that's fine. You can look at it however you want. The point is, what I would say is that the attendance was good. It could be better. It could be a lot better. It could also be a lot worse. And, shout out to the over 12,000 people that showed up and cheered for the team and supported the team. And, I would just say block out the noise, continue to do that, continue to tell your friends, and let's continue to try and pack out protective. The average attendance for the week was a little low. It was just under 10,000, so 9,855. Michigan was under 7,000 in terms of their attendance. San Antonio had less than us in the 11,000-ish range. And Arlington also was about, 8,000 and some. And so um no, not great in any market. I mean, out of all three of those markets, I think Birmingham did the best. I mean, I thought for sure San Antonio was probably going to have more fans than us because they opened week one on Easter with 13,000. And then on week two, or excuse me, well, for this week three game, their second home game, I thought that maybe they would go up because they weren't competing against Easter on a Sunday morning. And that was sort of, again, the excuse for them um, heading into that week one game. And the teams looked really good. I mean, they were undefeated until this week, and they had a big game against St. Louis. So I thought for sure they were going to have maybe 15,000 or more. They had incredible crowds back with the AAF. They were having 25,000 people there. They opened the season last year in San Antonio with over 20,000. So, they have a history, to their credit, of really turning out for these games and for these leagues and getting more fans than, frankly, Birmingham has historically. But they didn't really show up. So, that obviously wasn't great. Arlington was terrible. For a metro area of over 8 million people, I mean, to only have 8,000 people at your game, I mean, that's rough. And, again, maybe there's reasons for that, but I think that really needs to improve. Um, Obviously, the team losing three straight games to start the season is doesn't help, but they were the XFL champions last year. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I think that needs to improve. And Michigan obviously sub 7,000. Again, there's reasons for that. There's excuses that can be made for each one of these teams, Michigan included. But again, that's not a great number, um, big picture for the league. And so all that being said, I mean, I thought out of the four teams that played, Birmingham had the highest attendance. I thought, all things considered, it was probably the best attendance. I think the other places were more of a letdown. Does that mean Birmingham was amazing? Does that mean Birmingham had the attendance that it should have or needs to have? No. Everybody needs to improve at this point, with the exception of St. Louis. But, I think Birmingham is sort of carrying its weight to an extent. And again, we need to do better. We need to get more people out to these games. But uh, right now we certainly are one of the higher attended teams in the league, and I'll take that for what it's worth, and hopefully we can build on that moving forward. But anyway, all that to say, the average for the week wasn't great. The average attendance on the season right now is 13,000, just over 13,000. Obviously, that's very much buoyed by St. Louis having 40,000 fans at their first game. So, if you take that out, the attendance average drops off a good bit. But, um, you know, I, I've said enough about it. We could have a whole episode to talk about why is attendance a little bit lower right now in this league than in past spring football leagues, and there's probably a lot of reasons. But it's not where it needs to be. Hopefully, it improves this season and into future seasons. But it is what it is. That's where we're at. Related to that, I did want to mention there was a Sportico article that came out that gave out some more information about sort of the financials of the league and kind of what's been going on. For example, they talked about how there's a $10 million sponsorship deal that the UFL has with the Army. It also talked about for a 30-second ad spot for the league, it's $6,570, which is actually pretty low for something like this. And so I'll drop the link in the show notes, but I just wanted to mention that article because if you're interested in the attendance sort of numbers, the TV ratings, and how that affects the league financially and sort of how the league is potentially doing financially, then I think that's a great article to check out with a lot of insider information that I had not seen anywhere else or heard of from anyone else. And so I just did want to mention that. Um, just a couple other things here. It is worth mentioning the Stallions did sign kicker Ramiz Ahmed. He played for the Maulers in 2022, so you might recognize the name. He actually set the record for the longest field goal kick in the USFL history with a 61-yarder when he was with the Maulers. And so Chris Blewett, our kicker, who also came from the Maulers this past year, he hurt his quad. He hasn't been able to practice this week, and I think it's up in the air if he's going to be able to play this weekend. I think the assumption is that he's probably not. So the Stallions went ahead and signed Ahmed to sort of step in for him if he's hurt. My understanding is I don't think, the team's moving on from Blewett or something like that. I think once he's healthy, the job is still sort of his. He's been doing a great job for us, but for the time being, until he's 100%, we've got sort of, I think, a good kicker who can step in for us. Ahmed wasn't super accurate when he played in the USFL, but he had a huge leg. Like I said, 61-yard field goal, was great on kickoffs, was able to parlay that into a deal with Green Bay Packers. So a great player to bring in, and certainly glad that we can have him step in, for as long as we might need him. Um, just so you know, this Friday night, the 19th at 7 p.m. at the Barons game, it's actually going to be Stallions night. So they've done this the past few years. They're probably going to have, player throughout the first pitch and those sorts of things, kind of promote the team, kind of, promote each other at this Friday night Barons game. So if you're free Friday night, definitely check that out. And then Saturday night, you can bounce over to Protective and support the Stallions there. Saturday night at the Stallions game will be a throwback theme. So I don't know yet, as of recording this, what exactly that's going to entail. If there's going to be some sort of giveaway, if there's going to be, I think, potentially maybe players or staff or cheerleaders from the '80s teams that will be recognized. It remains to be seen what all that's going to go into that. But there is going to be some things to look forward to, I'm sure, with that being a throwback theme. Also, Official League dropped their first article of clothing. I know I mentioned them last week on here. It was a windbreaker. Speaking of throwback themes, a very kind of 80s vibe windbreaker. So if you're into that sort of thing, definitely check that out. And the US or UFL, excuse me, started talking about USFL and now mixed up. But the UFL shop also has been adding new merch items. Like I think they've got a patch in there now, and some other kind of accessories. So continue to check that stuff out. They're adding new stuff all the time, and they've got some good offerings in there. And this is kind of the big thing of the week. Move this way. This is kind of the real news I wanted to talk about is that the Stallions actually had a new horse run out on the field before the game. So if you've been into a Stallions game before, especially in the past 2 years, you've seen that there's been a horse that has run out on the field to lead the team out before the game. And so last year, I was doing some deep investigative reporting and asked the handlers of the horse what the horse's name was. To which they told me his name is Shut Your Mouth, but AKA also known as, or prefers to go by, Bob. So Bob, aka Shut Your Mouth, or Shut Your Mouth, aka Bob, depending on, I guess, how you look at it, was the horse that ran onto the field before the games last year. And if you remember, there was a scare because there was one game where Shut Your Mouth, aka Bob, didn't show up and no one really knew why. And Scooby Wright actually tweeted, like, did anybody hear what happened to the horse? I heard he might have been in a wreck. And it came out that he was actually in a wreck on the way to the game. Fortunately, he was not injured or hurt or anything like that. And he was able to come out to a few more games last season. So before the game this week, I was walking past the front of Protective Stadium and I saw the horse, and it looked similar to Shut Your Mouth, aka Bob. And so I thought, oh, hey, there's Shut Your Mouth. I better go see him and say hey and take a picture with him. And so I go over to him, and they're like, "Oh, would you like a picture with the horse?" And I'm like, "Oh, actually, no. I'll just take a picture myself." But I was like, "Oh, this is Shut Your Mouth, right?" And they were like, "Oh no, Shut Your Mouth isn't with us today," which my heart kind of stopped for a beat. But I was like, "Oh, okay." I was like, well, who's this?" And they're like, "Oh, this is Chocolate." And I was like, "Oh, Chocolate." And they're like, "Yeah, Lil Chocolate." And I was like, "Oh, Lil Chocolate, yeah." And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, he's gonna run out on the field today." So we do have well, I guess I don't know. I don't know if this is going to be something for the rest of the season. I don't know if Shut Your Mouth, aka Bob, is coming back, or if we're just going to have Lil Chocolate, aka Chocolate, uh, permanently for this season. It's a really big question, and I'm going to have to do a deeper dive into this, because it raises a lot of other questions too. Like, if this is Lil Chocolate, is there a Big Chocolate? And if there is a Big Chocolate, where is he? Why didn't he come to the game and run out onto the field? So I don't know. There's a lot of questions surrounding the horse situation right now. I was very proud of Lil Chocolate. He did a great job running out on the field. He is kind of small, so I see why they named him that. But he did his job valiantly. Really got the team hyped up running out there on the field before the game. I'm sure Scooby especially was really excited to meet him. So shout out Lil Chocolate. Thank you for your hard work. When you get back to the stable, make sure you say what's up to Shut Your Mouth, aka Bob, for us all. We miss him. Hopefully he can come out to a game at some point this year. And maybe we can meet Big Chocolate too. I don't know. I need to look into this more, but I wanted to let you all know that this is sort of the big news right now in Stallions world. Back to other news. So our power rankings for week 3, just real quick, Stallions still number 1. I've got Michigan at number 2, St. Louis at 3. So both of those teams kind of trending up. Some people, in some power rankings I've seen out there had St. Louis at 2 and Michigan at 3 or 4. But I mean, Michigan beat St. Louis in week 1. I know that was a couple weeks ago. These teams have developed since then. But Michigan, I thought looked really good. Part of it was based me ranking them 2 over St. Louis 3. Part of that was based on the fact that they beat them in week 1, but part of it was also like Michigan, I think, is trending up in some ways. And EJ Perry, when he's on, he's on. He's inconsistent, at least so far, what I've seen from him. But when he's on, and he's really making plays with his arm and his legs. And I know Houston, who they played, isn't a great team, at least thus far, has not been. But, they looked good. And St. Louis had a great win, too. So, I mean, they're both trending up for me. They're very kind of neck and neck in that 2-3 spot. They had a obviously super close game in week 1, but just gave the edge to the Panthers for that reason. And then 4, I have the Brahmas, who fell off a little bit. But if you watch the show, I haven't been super high on them. I think they kind of lucked out the first couple weeks. I think they're still a very good team, top half of the league, but I think 4 is a little bit better for them than where they were previously. And then I've got Defenders at 5. Again, should they be at 5? I don't know. I feel a little uncomfortable with them there because, again, I think similar to San Antonio, I think they're a little overrated right now. And their record's a little inflated. It's maybe a good way to say it because I think they've, again, kind of scraped by a few games. And I don't know that actually they're that good relative to some of these other teams that are behind them. But they found ways to win, and there's something to be said about that. And so I don't want to take that away from them. So I've got them at 5, and then Showboats at 6, who I still think are a decent team, but they're not trending in the right direction, and they're kind of falling. And then Renegades at 7 and Roughnecks at 8. The Renegades really shouldn't be 0-3, but they are. And the Roughnecks, I mean, they've hung around in some games, but I mean, I think especially this week against Michigan, you really kind of saw against a little bit maybe better team. It wasn't pretty. So I've got them at 8, and in along those lines, then sort of predictions for this week. I wanted to go with Memphis over St. Louis in an upset, but I just can't bring myself to do it. I think these teams are trending in opposite directions. St. Louis is getting better. Memphis looks like they're only getting worse. St. Louis is getting to play at home again. It's just I got to go with St. Louis. I think St. Louis probably offense puts up too many points for Memphis to keep up with, and I think we're going to get a final score of something like 34-21 in this one. I'm going to take Michigan over San Antonio. I think if the news that came out this week about Chase Garbers getting hurt, missing the season hadn't come out, I might have gone with San Antonio over Michigan. But I think losing your quarterback, having to replace him, and then playing against a Michigan team that's kind of finding their stride, that makes me I have to lean Michigan on this one. And so I'm going to go with Michigan. We'll say 26-22. And I think it's going to be a close game, a good game, but I'm leaning Michigan on that one. And then I'm going to take Arlington over Houston. I think Arlington finally gets a win. I think Houston, again, is trending downward. I think Arlington's better than their record shows. They haven't won a game yet, but they've been in a couple close games and should have pulled it out this past week. Luis Perez is playing really well, not getting a lot of help from his defense. So fortunately for that defense, they're going up against a Houston offense that hasn't been that great. And so I like Arlington in that one, and I'm going to take them. We'll say I think Arlington, actually puts up a decent number of points. I'm going to say Arlington 28, Houston 13. I think Arlington takes out some anger on Houston this week and gets their first win. And one last thing here. Friend of the show, Tyler Leedy, he also has a YouTube channel called Buckeye Mike. He released his top podcast rankings. A few of these have come out now, at least that I've seen. And in his podcast rankings, he had us listed at number 2. And just wanted to, again, shout him out, thank him for that recognition. We always certainly appreciate the love and support. And just wanted to say to you all that we appreciate you tuning in and listening, and certainly hope that this helps, grow your love for the Stallions and for the Birmingham sports scene. But just want to mention that and just say we appreciate the love and support and the respect that the show has been able to garner over the short existence that it's had. So that's going to do it for this week. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Tried to make it a little bit more condensed the last few weeks. It's gotten kind of longer and longer and longer. So I'm trying to keep it down a little bit closer to that 30-40 minute range. And try to do that this week. But hopefully it was a helpful recap for you. Hopefully you enjoyed getting to hear about all the things going on with the Stallions. Hopefully you can make it out to the game on Saturday night. Certainly look forward to seeing you there, and giddy up.